For most of this century, Canada ran one of the most open immigration systems on the planet, and most Canadians were fine with that. It now has one of the highest shares of foreign-born residents anywhere in the world. Under former PM Justin Trudeau, that openness became a defining feature of Canadian politics, big annual targets for new citizens, and welcoming refugee pathways for people fleeing conflict in places like Syria and Ukraine. Then, in roughly the last year, that all flipped. Immigration has cratered, and net migration has actually turned negative, something that basically never happens in Canadian history. Let's look at how that happened. Through the 2000s and early 2010s, net migration to Canada sat around 200,000 to 300,000 people a year. After Trudeau took office in 2015, it climbed, topping 400,000 by 2019, then exploded post-pandemic, over 900,000 in 2022, past 1.1 million in 2023, still around 800,000 in 2024. Most of that surge wasn't permanent residents, it was temporary residents, students and foreign workers. Facing labor shortages after COVID, Trudeau's government loosened the rules so employers in several sectors could fill up to a fifth of their workforce through the low-wage temporary foreign worker stream. At the same time, it got easier for international students to convert a study visa into permanent residency, and Canadian schools increasingly dependent on foreign tuition leaned into it hard. Student visas went from about 200,000 in 2015 to nearly 700,000 by 2023. By the time Trudeau resigned in January 2025, the picture was already changing. Fast net migration for the first half of the year fell to just 60,000. But then it went further. Negative 90,000 in quarter 3, negative 100,000 in quarter 4, negative 50,000 in quarter 1 of this year. More people leaving than arriving. That's unprecedented for Canada. Most of this is being driven by temporary residents. That population has shrunk by over 500,000 since 2025. It's a direct result of new PM Mark Carney's policy shift, including caps on temporary residents. Carney has pledged to cut temporary workers and international students from over 7% of the population down to under 5% by the end of 2027, and he's made the temp to permanent pipeline harder to use. This is a response to public opinion, which soured badly as migration numbers spiked the share of Canadians, saying immigration levels were too high, rose from about 20% in 2020 to an all-time high of 54% in late 2024. Even permanent migration has dipped, partly the policy changes, but also a modest rise in Canadians and permanent residents leaving the country. There's evidence of a real brain drain. A TD Economics report this year found Canada's more qualified immigrants were actually the ones most likely to leave, a sign the job market isn't absorbing skilled workers well. It's worth putting Canada's turn in a wider context, because this isn't happening in isolation. Australia has gone through something similar. Canberra slashed its international student intake and tightened its own temporary skilled worker visas after net migration hit record highs in 2023. The UK did the same thing under both the last Conservative government and the current Labour one, raising salary thresholds for work visas and cutting the number of dependents that international students can bring with them. So Canada isn't an outlier here, it's part of a broader pattern across major English-speaking immigration destinations, where governments that spent the 2010s competing to attract global talent are now competing to be seen reining it in. There's also a domestic wrinkle worth mentioning: Quebec. Because Quebec controls its own immigration selection under a special federal agreement, it's been able to move even faster than Ottawa on cuts, lowering its own permanent resident intake targets and putting a moratorium on some economic immigration streams entirely, citing pressure on housing, French language integration, and public services. That's added a second layer to the national numbers. Quebec's restrictions are partly why the drop in permanent residents nationally has been steeper than population trends alone would predict. There's also a labor market angle that's easy to miss. Sectors that leaned hardest on temporary foreign workers, food service, retail, some parts of agriculture are now reporting staffing shortages again in certain regions, which is reviving a debate that had gone quiet: whether Canada actually created its own labor shortage by cutting too fast, or whether those jobs were always going to be filled by automation and wage increases once the temporary labor tap was turned off. Economists are genuinely split on this, and it's likely to become one of the more contested threads in Canadian economic policy over the next couple of years. None of this is to say Carney's approach is unpopular. It clearly isn't, based on the polling, but it does mean the story isn't finished. The population decline, the brain drain data, and now emerging labor shortages in specific sectors all suggest Canada is still in the middle of figuring out where the right equilibrium actually sits, rather than having landed on a stable new normal. the demographic impact is significant. Canada's natural population growth, births minus deaths, is already negative, so without immigration to offset it, the population actually fell by 100K in 2025, the first annual decline since World War II. It's also likely to drag the fertility rate, currently about 1.3, down further. Politically, though, it's working out well for Carney. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre still polls better on immigration specifically, but as net migration has dropped, the issue has cooled. Voters are now more focused on the economy and relations with the U.S. The share saying there are too many immigrants dropped from 54% in late 2024 to 47% in late 2025, while those saying the number is about right rose from 34% to 38%. Falling immigration may also be easing Canada's housing crunch, another win for Carney with prospective homebuyers. The result: Carney's net approval sits around plus 23, and he personally polls at plus 19, arguably making him the most popular centrist leader anywhere right now. For a country that has been reliably pro-immigration for decades, rewarding a leader for cutting it back is a striking signal of just how much public opinion on this issue has shifted.